councillor for 16 years, a man who will actually have more time on his hands after the 6th of May for a couple of reasons I can think of there. We've also got Dennis Payne here, chair of the Histon Impington Parish Council, who has been involved with the Parish Council since '95, I believe. And he was also chair of the planning committee before myself. We've also got John Pavey here, engineer, meticulous to detail, who many of you would know. He lives at one of the 42 interesting buildings on page 44 of the plan. There's also another 41 of those. Now, without further ado, I think the best person to introduce the neighbourhood plan, it's not going to be myself, it's going to be David Jenkins. So, if I may, over to you, David.
Perched on the shoulder of the mighty Andes will never more have its siestas interrupted by the mad cackling of Senor Don. France, yodeling out there on the rim of the equator, daring.
David, sorry, can you unmute yourself? I've muted everyone so that thank you.
There we go. That should be me unmuted. And I think I've worked out how to use the laser pointer. And I think I can manage two screens simultaneously. It's the 29th of April 2021, which is a little bit of over 8 years since this whole process started, as far as I can see. And it all grew out of work that we did way back, looking at the redevelopment of the station site and the other sites around it, and the thoughts that we needed to get some control over development in the community so that we might get things which were good for the community and not just good for developers. That was also the time that South Cambs came out with their first draft of the local plan, which they approved a year or so ago. And as a result of our activity at that time, we got a couple of policies in that local plan which were favourably disposed towards Histon and Impington. And then we were advised by the planning gurus at South Cambs that the right way to go forward was to do a neighbourhood plan. There were new things in those days, so we started on them. And I will just go through some of the thinking behind the plan now. I'm not going to talk about the policies as such, but just to put it into a context of why it's come out the way it has. And I'm going to presume that you've all got copies of the little book, if not all of you have downloaded the big book. When we started, we reckon there were 3 reasons for doing this. One was money, because in those days, there was an idea that something called the Community Infrastructure Levy was going to replace what we called Section 151 funding. It's not 151, anyway, something like that. And if you had a neighbourhood plan, you get 25% instead of 15%. That's not happened yet. We live in hope. So maybe there's no money after all. But the second point is probably the most important. If we've got a neighbourhood plan, it sets rules which can be used to control what developers do. When somebody comes in with a planning application, and it is contrary to things which are in the neighbourhood plan, then you can fight the planning application. The third advantage to doing it, and it's been tremendously valuable in terms of our thinking at the parish council, it gives us a view of the future. And we know what we need to be planning for, what we should be thinking about investing in the future in order to do the right thing for the community. So if you've got some plans and some policies in place, you can start to do some sensible planning about the future. So those we reckoned way back in 2013 were the 3 reasons to go ahead with doing a neighbourhood plan. We defined a territory for the plan in those days, which was not all of Histon and Impington. We decided to exclude that part of Histon and Impington down here called King's Meadow, because it is detached and it is more rationally a part of the city. And we did discuss this with King's Meadow at the time, and they understood the reason behind it. There's also going to be a bit of Impington down here for a while as Darwin Green gets developed, but chances are that's going to be absorbed into a larger Darwin Green community. But we are left with this Histon and Impington area north of the A14, close to Cambridge, but not a part of it. And I think it's that proximity close to Cambridge, but not a part of it, which distinguishes our community and makes it so different to all the other villages in South Cambs. We're surrounded tightly by the green belt. So here's the houses, here's the green belt, and green belts are a national policy standard, and you can't build on them unless you've got a really good excuse. And that really is quite a high bar to get over. We are a tight community with most homes within 800 meters either of the post office or of the guided bus stop. And as we all know, there's a vibrant high street, there's good schools, a highly rated doctor's surgery and a hospital, let's not forget, 6 pubs and 5 churches, an excellent recreation ground and office park employing 2,000 people, at least it did before COVID came along, and the UK's largest jam factory. Interestingly, this slide was first put together 6-7 years ago, and despite the worst that COVID has thrown at us, we've still got our 6 pubs and 5 churches. So we are a very stable community when you think about things. And we're the home to a lot of clubs and societies, sports clubs and other societies that keep people occupied in the evenings and at weekends. We did a big survey as a part of the neighbourhood plan in 2016. We got an external company to do it for us. And it's important to get external companies to do surveys for you because they give you an objective view of the results. If you do your own surveys, you tend to want to do them just to confirm what your thinking is. So Enventure did the survey for us, and they gave us a lot of very useful conclusions and recommendations. Most importantly, they produced this chart here, which is the relative importance of various features and the needs to improve. And up here, you see the important facilities which were perceived by the community as needing to improve. Although we all value and cherish Firs House, we do know that it's in an old building and could do better. So lots of people say medical is really important, but we could do with improving the facilities. Not surprisingly, footpaths need to be improved, affordable homes, older people facilities, young people facilities. And at that time, there was perceived to be a need to improve the schools because the infant school, the infant school was short of space. We're starting to march people down to porter cabins at the site of the junior school. So a serious need for improvement. Fortunately, we now have the new school on Buxall Farm. So I suspect if we did the survey now, schools would slip down and still be important, but not in such a need to improve. What was interesting here is that pubs, restaurants, cafes and bars were seen as really important, but people were fairly pragmatic and said, but they don't really need to improve, they're good enough already. That data and all the other data from the big survey has been essential in providing the evidence base upon which the neighbourhood plan has been based. A number of issues were identified during this process, and quite frankly, even though we had an outside party do the work and their findings were objective, most of us could have written down this list of what the important issues are to the community. And the one that kept on coming back time and time again was this concept of village character. But everybody knows about the blight of the B1049. People are conscious of the need for healthcare and education, support for older and younger people. There's always a perceived need to address crime and antisocial behavior, although fingers crossed, I'm not sure that is such a big issue here. I would agree, though, that maintaining roads, cycle paths and footways is a big issue. And public transport, who knows what's going to come back when Stagecoach get back into their operations post-COVID. And although it's nice to know that your house is worth quite a lot of money, it really is a disaster if you're thinking about young people getting onto the housing ladder. And affordable housing is a crisis in this community, as with many others in this part of the world. We developed a vision based on all of this. And the words here are taken from the vision. And it's worth reviewing. It's a bit long, but we are a cohesive single community with a special character. And it is a remarkably good place to live. And sometimes if you describe it to other people, they say, well, you must live in a perfect place, which is why it's occasionally good that we have problems. I know that people complain, great Histon and Impington people are great people at complaining when we have roadworks on the high street and traffic lights, and HI people is full of people complaining about the chaos. For me, elements of chaos go hand in hand with the nature of Histon and Impington. And that's, we get through these because we're sustainable, but we'll have sufficient school places in the future, a good GP practice, good transport options, etc. We wish to continue to be resilient. We hope that we will be diverse, inclusive, and tolerant, and be welcoming of people who come to visit our villages to shop for education and work. We are fair dues fairly protective about the green belt, and we want it protected. We don't want to grow out of being what is effectively a large village. We don't want to be a small town. We certainly don't want to be a suburban part of Cambridge. But as with most good brands, if you'll pardon the expression, we've got a heritage, and that's important. And our community wishes to recognize that heritage and remain rooted in it, whilst being smart and taking advantage of what technology enables to happen in the future. So quite an exciting vision for Histon going forward. Now, I've got a problem with my laser pointer. It won't turn into an arrow. Should do it that way. Okay. Translated that into 6 priorities, which any plan for the future will have to adhere to. We need to encourage the growth and success of the retail, leisure, and other commercial businesses of the villages. It is remarkable how good our high street is and how it continues to go from strength to strength. I just keep my fingers crossed, though, that the next 5 years are going to see the same strength and improvement that we've had in the last 5. It's important that our social infrastructure is strong and robust and active, because that's the social infrastructure which has meant that we've done so well during COVID time. And the organization of the street coordinators that have looked after people are a consequence of our social infrastructure. We need to have housing which is good for the future and affordable homes where possible. We need to make sure that the villages are safe, secure, and supportive and welcoming for all, and in fact can ensure that people can not live active and fulfilling lives, but successful ones too. We need to have good transport within and around the village, and we need to protect the essential character. For your information, as we were developing the 4 iterations of this neighbourhood plan, we didn't have that 5th priority in for quite a long time. We introduced that, and it's been a useful focal point, which has brought together a couple of other policies which previously didn't have a home. It is this essential character which characterizes us, which we need to find ways of protecting. We adopted 4 guiding principles, which we said that any work we do needs to adhere to. We are close to Cambridge. We are populated now by a lot of people who work in the knowledge economy. There's a lot of working from home, but many people work in the science parks, in the university, and at Addenbrooke's. We should be able to take full advantage of technology to make sure that everybody can live well within our community. We should be sustainable in social, environmental, and commercial terms. We should be diverse and inclusive, offering everyone the opportunity to live in and contribute to the community. And we need to recognize all the time the advantages that heritage and design bring to us. And out of all of that, the 6 priorities and the guiding principles, we've come up with this set of 17 policies, which you see in the neighbourhood plan. Over the 4 iterations of the plan, they've changed a little bit. A couple have been dropped out, a couple have been added during later iterations, but substantially they've all remained, the set has remained the same. And as you can see, the priorities relate to the policies themselves. All of them contribute in a major way to one priority and also contribute to the others. And they are all consistent with the principles that we've set. And there is a slide which is missing. That always happens. The missing slide is the one that what happens next. So let me just try and remember what was in that. We go to the referendum next Thursday, and you get the opportunity to vote yes or no. And if you vote yes, then fairly quickly it will become a material planning consideration. It requires South Cambs to do something to formally make that happen. But it's not fossilized. And within the plan itself, there is a chapter on modification and follow-up to the plan, and the recommendation that it be reviewed every year by the Parish Council with an update to the plan, republished at least once every 5 years. So it's not a fossilized document, it's a document that can evolve, but it's a stable document, and we shouldn't think it's something to be changed willy-nilly, because if you're going to change it, of course, you need to go through the exercise of consultation and getting approval for the change. If it's voted down, sadly, then we won't have a material planning consideration, so we will have no village prepared policies which developers will be obliged to adhere to. If we wish to vote it down and start again, well, I trust we wouldn't have to spend another 8 years on it, but it would be another 5 years. And we do know that coming along in the future is another iteration of the South Cambs and City local plan. And we don't know whether we would get in before that happens this time, whereas this time we've come in before that has happened. So it would be sad if it was voted down, because there are many advantages to going ahead with it and few disadvantages. There will be many people who will support 90% of this plan, but say that 10% I don't like. Well, that's the nature of compromise in this world. If you're going to vote a plan down because you don't like 10% of it, it's really sad, because 90% good is just about as good as you get most of the time. So I hope everybody will vote to support this plan, but I'll be happy to take any questions going forward.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much. That's that's clear. My mind's already made up on this, but there we go. Dennis, would you like to mention anything else? I don't think David's missed anything out there, but Dennis, please carry on if there's something you'd like to add to that.
Thank you, Simon. No, I don't think I do want to particularly add anything. As David says, we spent a fair amount of the initial phase of the planning process, assuming that the community infrastructure levy would come in. South Cambs abandoned taking that forward about 3 years ago, and it may come back or it may not. At the moment, we're still getting what are called Section 106 payments. So we do have some resource coming in from development, not a great deal, but some. Still, probably wouldn't actually produce quite as much. So we're not actually in such a bad place on that one. But yes, I mean, I think because we've got the referendum and it's been reviewed by South Cambs on multiple occasions, and it's been reviewed by a planning inspector as well. Because we've got to this referendum status, it already carries some weight when planning applications come up. Not a great deal, but at least some. And certainly, everybody I'm sure will remember the McCarthy and Stone application. And there are at least a couple of the policies there which it was in breach of, which we could use in our objection. And there have been other applications that the planning committee has looked at where we've used both the neighbourhood plan and the village design guide. And both of these, don't forget, have been driven by people. The village design guide through an active consultation process and the neighbourhood plan through that big survey. They've been driven by the community. And they are really powerful tools to help on the planning front. And the neighbourhood plan will be even more powerful if it is approved. So yes, I think my view is made up as well, and I hope that people may be able to feel supported. That's all I want to say. Thank you at the moment, Simon.
Thank you very much. Right, now in terms of questions, most of the questions that have actually come into us, they have already been answered. Those ones are on the HI Plan website. Now, is anybody here got any other questions? And actually, I will be blunt, is anybody thinking of voting no, and why? Well, that's obviously that is clearly a good sign. If we get 100% in this
Simon,
vote, then that'd be great. Thank you. Oh, Cedric, yes, I saw you there. Thank you. Oh, you might need to unmute yourself, Mr. Cedric. I think you're on mute, Cedric.
There's a lady called Anne Norton has got her hand up.
Okay. Okay. Let me give.
Am I all right to chip in?
Yes, please do. We'll go back to Cedric in a moment. Yes, please do.
So, first of all, I think neighbourhood planning is a great opportunity for local communities, and I think the Histon Impington document is comprehensive and really well prepared. I do have quite a major concern with the parking requirements in it. My background is architecture. I've done quite a lot of kind of development planning in Cambridge and elsewhere. And I've also done a lot of research in sort of community-led development and how beneficial it can be for sort of sustainability, both socially and kind of environmentally, and also in terms of shaping policy. So I kind of, the concerns I have come from my experience of doing kind of schemes where I've considered these things quite extensively. And I did a quick kind of scan through of other kind of local planning policies. I looked at the Cambridge City Council local plan, the East Cambs local plan and the South Cambs local plan to just compare the parking requirements to the ones that are proposed in the Histon and Impington neighbourhood plan. And the ones in the Histon and Impington neighbourhood plan are the highest by far. And that concerns me for kind of multiple reasons, partly from an environmental perspective, because I think planning policy that encourages and enables high levels of car ownership is like really problematic, because it basically bakes in the problem of like high levels of car ownership, which is like carbon emissions as well as congestion, dangerous roads, discouraging cycling, discouraging walking. Also, I think from a socially sustainable point of view, I think designing with the car as a priority is also problematic. It makes places generally more grey, you know, there's more hard landscaping, there's less greenery. It again makes things less safe for cyclists and pedestrians. And it also just dictates a type of architecture which is like sprawling and uses land inefficiently. And then the kind of other major concern I have with it is that it will be applied retrospectively to extensions, a lot of which, you know, the houses in the village will have been built kind of long before the private car even existed as an idea. And to kind of apply modern parking standards to existing houses for people who want to kind of extend fairly modestly in ways that kind of make their houses more suitable for them in the long term, I think seems really problematic. I think it will like disadvantage a lot of people in the community compared to kind of previous generations who've been able to extend, or people who live on large plots with ample parking space. So those are my concerns. I really don't want to vote against the plan because I think it's a good document, and I think I really believe in the idea of kind of local autonomy in planning policy. But I also would struggle to conscientiously vote for it because of that policy. So I'm slightly torn, basically.
Thank you very much. That was actually covered quite a bit in the FAQs, but I think the best person really to say something about this would actually be Dennis Payne, chair of the actual Histon Impington Parish Council. Dennis, do you want to say anything about that?
Anne, thank you for that. And it's a great pity you've only just moved into the village. We really could have done with your expertise when putting the plan together in the first place.
And I'm really sorry that I'm bringing this at this late stage as well. I know it's a really difficult time to come up with a complaint.
I think, as David says, we don't see this as a dead document, frozen in time. So, yes, I think you're raising some incredibly good points. Parking was one of the things that came back through the big survey. We recognise that I think one of the other trends over the last few years has been more and more young people living at home, and whilst not necessarily using a car, wanting to have a car so that they can go out at weekends and the like. But I think the other thing I would say is that not only did we look at parking, and on some of our roads, parking is a real problem. So actually ensuring that was adequate parking, and you're right that the numbers are higher than that in the South Cambs plan. But in South Cambs, they have this get out phrase which says, you may need more parking for visitors, delivery vehicles and tradesmen, which they never actually managed to provide. But one of the other things we've done as well is that we've pushed up the requirements for cycle provision in that same policy. And also the phraseology, I think, is something along the lines of cycle provision should be in a cycle storage for premises should be in a place such that it's actually equally easy to get to your cycle as your car if you're going on a short journey. So the policy was trying to be all things to all people, and perhaps it's failed on that. It's certainly driving, there's a commitment there to ask for more cycle provision. But I think it's acknowledging also that, yes, in this community, there are households at last survey with 3 cars. There are households with 4 or more cars. Not many, but there were those. And what we're seeing is, in places, some very big houses with 4 and 5 bedrooms being built. And just from my own local knowledge, I see a lot of houses in some parts of the village where you have the same number of cars as there are people living in them. And yeah, it would be great to change that. And I think over the next few years, we will begin to see real change in that arena come forward, because if we're going to hit some of our carbon reduction targets, the number of cars that we are going to be allowed to have is going to have to drop fast. So it may well be that we're documenting something that was possibly right 3 years ago and will be possibly wrong in 3 or 4 years' time. And therefore that might be something to start looking at as a first iteration of where we might want to see some change.
Thank you very much for that, Dennis. Does that answer your question then?
It does. It doesn't completely allay my concerns, I think. I think I'd be really interested to see the data about kind of car ownership amongst kind of small houses, car ownership in different places in the village. I think my impression from reading the policy was what you said, which was that it was kind of it was in a way kind of trying to please everybody. And I quite strongly believe that planning policy should sort of set progressive targets, because the impact of planning policy is seen for decades. Even a few years worth of policy, if things kind of get planning during it and are built based on that planning permission, you know, the buildings that are built because of that can last 60 plus years. You know, some of the houses in the village that we look at now have been here for far more than 60 years. And so I think it's something that and I think the kind of the climate change emergency is a very, very urgent and pressing concern, and sort of planning policy that encourages like kind of lifestyle choices that are counter to the goal of tackling it really make me nervous, because you're baking in problems for the future with policy that can last for years, and then houses that can last for lots longer. So I still feel uncomfortable about it.
One thing I'd like to say is, just because a house has got 4 parking spaces doesn't mean you have to own a car.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, can I move to Cedric now? Cedric, I'm sorry about that. We missed out on you earlier, but can you repeat your question, please?
Well, yes.
Then I'll move to Chris. Thank you.
Well, first question to David, really. You mentioned, David, in your talk that the South Cambs and City will bring out a revised plan of their own. Is that right?
South Cambs and the City are working on the next iteration of the local plan. Yes.
Yeah, my question is, could that plan override what we're doing in Histon and Impington?
I'm going to take a punt on this, and we do have some district councillors on the call who will contradict me if I am wrong, and I'm sure Dennis will correct me. But in the same way that the government can set laws which override what happens locally, the new iteration of the South Cambs and City local plan would be able to override policies in this plan.
Yeah,
that's the way hierarchies work, Cedric, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Does anybody disagree with me, guys?
Can I
Dennis,
speak?
you're going to make a comment.
No, I'll cede to Martin first.
No, Well, I was simply going to say, as I understand it, and this is what we explained, that yes, the latest plan tends to be to all be the one that you look to when there is a conflict between the policies. I mean, and the key issue here is to make sure that when you comment on the local plan, that you ensure that the neighbourhood plan policies are taken into account in the local plan revision. So that that's generally the position. But on things which affect the village, the neighbourhood plan will still be the thing that you look to, really.
As long as there is no tighter requirement from the local plan.
That's right. That's where the conflict could come.
Mm.
I'm between on the issue of vehicles. The problem is very difficult to know the future, and as Anne was saying, to plan for the next 60 years. We've already seen the problems that arise, for instance, whether we're planning for tighter restrictions in Orchard Park, where the parking problems are enormous. We don't really know whether the future will in fact be more electric cars where using renewable energy, or how much it will be that and how much it will be public transport. It's difficult to predict how it will go, but clearly where it's possible. The other thing that may be very relevant from looking at Orchard Park, there's virtually no provision, and it will be very difficult to introduce provision for providing electric supply points. So that's something which is going to be a very big issue. It is difficult to predict, but seems to be that's clearly what the community feels are the big issues at the moment, and we just have to keep an eye on as society evolves.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm sorry, Chris Carey. Sorry about that. Can we come to you if you've got a question there? Have you?
Yes, I have. Thanks, Simon. There's a couple of issues. I mean, firstly, I think this is a really good document, very professionally put together, very thorough. And personally, as a resident of over 30 years in the village, I'd much prefer to be guided by a document written by people who have the interests of the village or villages at heart, rather than South Cambs local plan. So fundamentally, I'm very much in favour, and I will be voting in support of it. I suppose one of the questions is, how do you make sure the residents don't have apathy towards it and don't bother to vote? So I think it is the document, and sending the booklet around is really positive so that people have an idea of what's going on. But a lot of people will just think, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm sure it'll go ahead. Let's not even bother. So it's probably some way to encourage people to vote. Again, although I've got a few comments about it, like David was saying earlier, 90% of what's in the document, I would fully support. I suppose can I raise one of the two of the issues that jumped out at me, just so that I can get some feedback for what the thinking is in the plan. Buxall Farm, where the new school is being positioned, in map 6, and it's headed main facilities in the plan area, it shows a site that goes virtually up to the existing farmhouse, which is about 3 times that of the school site. So does that mean that there is some plans for the rest of that land in terms of education?
I would like to point to David Jenkins, partly, I mean, not only has he been a county councillor for 16 years, but I would say David Jenkins really is the person to answer that, if you could, David.
Yeah, I was wondering if Chris had some other questions, and we'll take them all in one go.
Tackle them all at the same time, David. Yeah. I suppose the others was the aspirational cycling and walking routes, some of which cross various of the farms, so from Manor Farm to Butsall Farm, and also to Mill Lane Farm. And there's a series of cycle and walking routes. And it would just be interesting to know as to, in terms of aspirational, where do you go to make those a reality? Has there been consultation with landowners? So I think that was that was quite interesting to get some feedback as to how are these going to be developed into reality. So I'd just be interested to hear about that. And I suppose the last one, which is really related to the neighbourhood plan, is more to do with the east-west rail. And that's really where the village stands in terms of the very strong motion that's coming from those that impacted from the southern route. If somehow or other they're persuaded that actually the northern route, which seems to have a huge number of obstacles against it, and the reason why the company that designed it rejected in the first place, whether all of a sudden, with all the pressure that's coming to bear on that, it becomes a bit more of a threat to us. And I'm just interested to know whether that's a neighbourhood plan issue, a parish council, you know, how we as a village react to that.
Okay, thank you, Chris. First of all, thanks for your kind remarks about the quality of the plan and the document itself. 90% of the credit for that lies with John Pavey, who's done a superb job in supporting the team. And John wasn't just the guy who published the plan, he actually provided an awful lot of the input to it as well. So thank you, John. I can in fact show the map to which you refer, which is that one there, I think. Yep.
Yeah,
this is the bit of land. The map was drawn before they had decided where to put the school. We just knew the school was going to be somewhere in that one belt. We did not wish the plan to constrain where they would put the school, so we gave them a lot of space there. That was a bit of pragmatism. We have no knowledge of any plans to do anything else in that pink space.
Okay.
Yep. There is an error in the footpath map on Mill Lane, and it shows it as being public road too far north than it should be. We have spoken to the landowners, and if you have a look on the HI Plan website, there's a list of corrections that we would love to make, but believe it or not, we can't change the plan. Once it went beyond a certain stage, the plan is the plan is the plan, and that's it. Those who know planning law will know all about that. So it's there, warts and all, which, by the way, is the one reason why we couldn't take full account of climate emergencies and stuff like that, because that was something which really came in subsequent to us going through the formal consultation processes. Most of the landowners made responses when we went out for consultation on the plan. None of them have we engaged in any formal negotiation. Chivers especially has been very positive about the call for additional access and footpaths, etc. But they do play a very careful game as they talk to us, and they're very good local landowners. Even NIAB has talked positively about how we might find mechanisms for putting footpaths across their land. It is what I call one of the softer policies in the plan, in that it, to some extent, calls for best efforts. But you'll never get any action in a particular area if you don't flag up your intention to get action in the area. And that's what that's all about. And East-West Rail, that's becoming a bit of a political football, so I prefer not to go into that this evening. But if the northern route ever does get mooted, we just need to marshal the residents of Oakington and Histon and Impington and presumably Cottenham, because it'll damage their communities, and make sure that our MP is as vocal as the MP from the south, who is playing a very naughty game at the moment. But it's outside the scope of our plan, unfortunately. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, fact it is.
Thank you, David.
Yes, thank you very much for that. On another brief point, Chris, a number of us on the Parish Council are promoting this over the next week. The whole idea, at the moment, I mean, how many people in our villages have read the whole 150-page document and fully understand it. Now, obviously, the common strap lines, what it really means, these are the kind of messages that we are getting out there in the next week. So, I mean, I think with everybody here, it is a case of, obviously, if you believe in this plan, then explaining and talking to people in the village that obviously will make a big difference as well. Thank you. Now then, I can't see anybody else with their hand up at the moment. Now, whether that means everything is clear and concise already, or whether anybody else has another question or wants to make another point, if you want to raise your hands, please do so. So there is a number, the questions that have already been submitted, they've already been answered. And if you look at the HI Plan website, you've then got the questions listed there that have been placed up until now, as well as those answers. Now, thank you very much. Now, one thing I would like to say is, I mean, I hope after this, you do all realise the importance of not only voting yes in the neighbourhood plan, but in letting your neighbourhood obviously know what it means. Although the next meeting is potentially not on my diary yet, there's going to be another meeting a little bit like this, but somewhat different in 2031. Now, when the plan expires, 2031, but the point is, of course, consultation up until now, and David wants to say something else, so please do carry on.
No, I was just going to say, Simon, you're in full flow and you're doing very well. But in the big booklet on page 144, paragraph 8.2, it refers to the establishment of the Histon Impington Neighbourhood Plan Monitoring Group. And it would be wonderful to get some people who would come forward and say, it's okay as it stands, but we need to come up with the next iteration sooner than we expected. So let's get our teeth into it. And we expected formal reviews to take place in 2024 and 2029. So, you know, now's the chance to reflect the changes that have taken place since we started on this. And John and I would be delighted if someone else would take it over.
Thank you very much. Another thing I think is worth mentioning is obviously we have the neighbourhood plan here. A number of people here have also got our village design statements. Sorry, David, how really does this relate to the village design statement? It's two different documents, I realise that.
They're two different documents, but the design statement was published in its own right, and then the neighbourhood plan refers to the design statement. So the design statement sits within the neighbourhood plan. And obviously the design statement, I think, was put together by a village group, which included two of our local architects. And of course, the neighbourhood plan had one of our local architects as a part of that team as well. So we'd love people like Anne to get involved going forward so we can change the names on the architects side of things. It'd be really great to have some more people involved.
Thank you. Now, if there's no other questions.
Simon, very quickly,
Carry on.
One of the other people on the team was Jeff Moore, who's on the screen. So I'll say thank you to him whilst he's there. And Brian Ing, of course. Sorry, go on, Simon, close us down.
I was just saying, I see no further questions, and thank you for your detailed explanation, David. And thank you, David, for all the work you've done on this. And also, although not directly related to this, thank you for being a great county councillor for the last 16 years, David.
Yeah, here.
Much appreciated. Here, yes, thank you. With that, David seemed to think that he were going to get this done within an hour. So there you are, David. We have got it done within an hour. And I think there's no questions and everything is explained to its entirety. thank you very much once again, all for coming. And
Thank you, Simon.
that's quite all right. So again, the 6th of May, there's 4 decisions to make, but this one is a simple yes, no, and not a decision of multiples. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye all.